Here's some highlights from a short report written by Thomas Andrews and Flannery Burke, January 2007, entitled, "What Does It Mean to Think Historically?" This is a very short article, but it was very powerful, very condensed on the 5 C's of historical thinking. And as always, my purpose is to read mostly highlights that I took from the book or the report, and then you can decide if it's something that you'd like to read yourselves. So the 5 C's are change over time, context, causality, contingency, complexity. Here's some highlights on the change over time. Timelines can teach change over time, as well as the selective process that leads people to pay attention to some events while ignoring others. So change over time is the most natural of histories. It's the straightforward narrative. Easy to understand. Context. Historians who excel at the art of storytelling often rely heavily upon context. Imaginative play is what makes context arguably the easiest, yes, also paradoxically the most difficult of the 5 C's to teach. He's referring to, for example, exercises where students will dress up as 18th century citizens, and they take a school day, and they using the methods and the tools that the students have. What they're saying is that it's easy to do, but there's some dangers to that. They say focusing on role playing and depictions, quote, often blur the lines between reality and make-believe. The picturesque often trumps more banal or more disturbing truths. The desire to recreate a world sometimes drives students to dig more deeply into their books, a reaction few teachers lament. So in one way, it makes people be more interested. And it's like a movie. My interest in history came from essentially movies when I was a child and so on, right? So it's a powerful depiction that trumps any word, but it does not give you, it gives you a very imperfect view. It's good to the senses, but to the mind, it gives you an imperfect view, a very incomplete view of history. Going on to the 3rd C, causality. While scientists can devise experiments to test theories and yield data, historians cannot alter past conditions to produce new information. Some exercises that teachers do is, quote, after arming students with primary sources, we ask them to argue. And this will provoke different debates on what caused certain events to come to pass. Contingency. Contingency may in fact be the most difficult of the C's. To argue that history is contingent is to claim that every historical outcome depends upon a number of prior conditions, that each of these prior conditions depends in turn upon still on other conditions, and so on. You see how complicated that can become, right? It seems to me that, this is my own comment, what-if scenarios that so many of us like, they belong in historiography, but paradoxically, we don't find them in historiography. We find them in fiction. It's only because we're dealing with something that didn't happen. Should we only be covering the past that did happen scientifically? If the answer is yes, then what would cover basically what-if scenarios? It seems to me that a great deal of this thought belongs in scientific thought and not in fiction, but most of the what-if scenarios that we see is in novels and movies. There are a few books that cover a historical analysis of a what-if scenario. Well, that's a contradiction in term. A scientific analysis, but not many. The author does say, I believe that this is what we would call it, quote, futurology, however, might offer an even stronger tool for imparting contingency than biography. Mechanistic views of history as the inevitable march towards the present tend to collapse once students see how different their world is from any predicted in the past. End quote. Out of the 5 C's, it seems like contingency is the one that would benefit more from the futurology or what-if scenarios, because it teaching you how to think historically is sometimes more important than knowing history itself, right? History is not hard to learn. That's when we're talking about the change over time analysis, which is straightforward, right? Finally, complexity. Moral, epistemological, and casual complexity distinguish historical thinking from the conception of history held by many non-historians. Reenacting battles and remembering names and dates require effort, but not necessarily analytical rigor. End quote. Yet most of the books that we see in stores, history books, will concern themselves precisely with straightforward battle piece, two-dimensional analysis. Battle piece is basically, the general books on the Battle of Midway, the Battle of Gettysburg, Battle of Stalingrad, where they have all the facts, they have maps, and so forth, right? I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I love operational histories. That's why I do board games, right? But should people be taught complexity and then they would flock to it? I think, yes, naturally, if you like history enough and you get tired of the two-dimensional analysis and you look for something else. Quote, nostalgia conjures an uncomplicated golden age that saves us the trouble of having to think about the past. End quote. My comment on that is that I find that it is a safe haven for those that refuse to change, for example, their political thoughts. It's easy to just be caught up on what happened in the past and what it meant. Because nostalgia is so integrated with our emotional part of the soul instead of the intellect. For example, here's an illustration. In studying digestion, to eat a sandwich, it's much better than reading about a sandwich. Yet often the memory of such food is even better than the actual eating of it. We rarely remember any digestive effects, but surely everything is part of the process. So we should take the whole experience as part of the digestion study. But if we're stuck on how we remember the taste to be, then it's scientifically dangerous to stay there. And that's where a lot of people, especially the ones that are into politics, will say. For example, the Spanish Civil War, people will focus on the lost republic, the republic that lasted from the Second Spanish Republic that lasted from 1931 to 39. They get caught up on what never was, or the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. Or Abraham Lincoln. We put these figures on a pedestal, and we do not go back necessarily too often to analyze the other aspects and certainly the flaws, right? In conclusion, they say, quote, it is our hope that this might help students to see the past not simply as prelude to our present, not as a list of facts to memorize, a cast of heroes and villains to cheer and boo, not as an itinerary of places to tour, but rather as an ideal field for thinking long and hard about important questions. What does it mean to think historically is the title, Thomas Andrews and Flannery Burke. And if you want to support this channel and you like tabletop strategy games, please see below the link on Civil War Commander, the game series that we have.